you understand how healing works? By understanding the process, we can not only heal ourselves, but understand why. Welcome to the Healing Power Hour with host Suzanne Hill. In our program, we will show you the healing modalities and approaches that you can use to heal yourself, no matter the illness or the symptoms. Now, here is your host, Suzanne Hill.
Hi, everybody. This is Suzanne Hill, and welcome back to the Healing Power Hour. We've got an interesting show lined up for you today as we're going to be covering, the topic of addiction, something that in our modern world most people have some experience or awareness of. There are those of us who struggle personally with addiction, and there are those of us who are one step removed in that we ourselves don't have an addiction, but perhaps we're witness to or are in relationship with someone who's struggling with or has struggled with an addiction, whether this person is a loved one, a family member, a friend, or even a coworker. While some of us are aware of our addictions, other of us are in denial about them, and then some of us have an addiction that we've literally hidden from everyone because of the shame we might carry about being an addict in the first place. And I'm using the word we here because most of us humans do carry some sort of addiction in one way, shape, or form. It's interesting that most people think of drugs or alcohol when they hear the word addiction, but the reality is that we can be addicted to all kinds of things, as you know. We can be addicted to food, sex, TV, the internet, shopping, religion, exercise even, and we can also be addicted to things like cleaning, or we can be addicted to being negative. It's such a wide range, and the intensity of addiction varies from person to person, depending on the amount of suffering that lies underneath that addiction. Several patients have asked me to cover this topic, so while I'm by no means an expert on the subject, I did want to share with you what I've learned about the energetics of addiction through working with my patients over the years. I also thought it was a perfect way to introduce listeners to a technique called EFT, which stands for the Emotional Freedom Technique. EFT is a healing protocol that was founded by a man named Gary Craig back in the early 1990s. And Gary was a Stanford-trained engineer who founded EFT on the basic premise that negative emotions cause disturbances in our energetic systems. And through the method of tapping on certain acupuncture points while also recalling a certain memory, the negative energy around that memory can get discharged. So with EFT, you can take the negative charge out of an experience sometimes within minutes, which I've personally witnessed. So EFT is a fascinating healing modality that I'm going to have today's guest, Jade Barbee, come on later in the show to talk about. Jade is an accomplished EFT practitioner who lives and works out of Vermont and sometimes New York. And I met Jade about 5 years ago, shortly after I first learned about EFT. I've worked with him both in person and over the phone, so I can tell you firsthand Jade is a lovely human being who has a lot to offer. So he's going to be coming on the show at about 20 past the hour to talk not only about EFT as it relates to addiction, but Jade also works with many kinds of healing issues, and he's even putting together an EFT program that deals specifically with writer's block, so you're going to want to stay tuned, and I'm certainly looking forward to all he has to share with us today. Now, on to our topic of addiction. And before I get started, I just wanted to say that I know that addiction is a heavy topic because there can be a lot of judgment and shame around it. But I'm hoping that what I offer up today can give people some food for thought that will help clear some of that heaviness, because there is always a way through the darkness. So onward. Well, from the perspective of an acupuncturist and healer, the main framework or concept that I work off of when looking at addiction is that on the deepest, most primal level, all addiction is about spiritual longing. And this spiritual longing comes from our psyche's strong desire to feel whole and complete. Now, this desire to feel whole and complete is par for the course of being human and is, from my perspective, the soul's journey over the course of a lifetime. But what influences whether or not we may take on an addiction is the extent to which we have the ability to tolerate this feeling of lack of wholeness. Can we tolerate this feeling of lack of completion, this emptiness inside? The less able we are to sit with our discomfort of not feeling whole, we will feel compelled to fill that emptiness with something. So we fill that emptiness with some sort of activity that will leave us feeling temporarily filled. But because that feeling doesn't last, we're compelled to repeat that activity over and over again, hence the addiction. Now, that emptiness, that feeling of not being whole, comes from one or more places in our bodies where we have severe energetic contraction. Remember that energy either expands or contracts, and when we go throughout our day, we're typically in a natural rhythm of expanding and contracting. But in the case of addiction, there are actual palpable places that I can feel on a patient's body that are so contracted that when I put my hands over them, it feels like dead space. There's no energy flowing through that part. In the case of a milder addiction, it just feels like blocked energy, like empty space. But in the cases of a more severe addiction, when I put my hands on those places, it almost feels like a black hole sucking in energy. The stronger and more powerful the addiction is, the bigger the energetic hole and the stronger that sucking feeling is. Sometimes it can feel like a wind tunnel. That's why the addiction is more severe in those cases. The patient has a much stronger need to balance the energy that's lost from that energetic hole. Well, what creates these energetic holes in the first place? These energetic holes typically come from strong emotional reactions to experiences we've had where that emotion is contractive in nature. If you remember in a previous episode, I talked about how there are positive emotions like love, joy, and peace that are energetically expansive, and when we experience these emotions, our energy expands. And then there are negative emotions such as anger, fear, sadness, and betrayal, just to name a few, that contract our energies. So when we experience those emotions, our energy contracts. Now, a mild experience of a negative emotion will only contract our energy temporarily. For example, we get into a fight with our partner about getting lost while driving somewhere, and we become angry and our energy contracts for an hour or so. But then that anger transitions on to annoyance, and then we move on to thinking about other things, and then our energy starts to open up again. But when we have a severe trauma that creates intense and enormous emotional pain, like the death of a child, for example, what happens is that the emotional reaction is so severe and intense because the pain is so extreme that we stay in contractive mode as a way to not feel the pain. So we contract our energies to not feel the pain, but unfortunately those emotions associated with that pain are then locked into our bodies. Unless we proactively take on talking through and working through our emotional experience of the trauma, which allows free flow of our energy to continue despite our experience of emotional pain, if we do not consciously decide to work on freeing up those emotions, they can literally remain frozen inside of us, kind of like a fossil. And it can take days, months, or even years for our energy to start to open up again, because the moment we open up, we're going to start to feel those painful emotions associated with that particular trauma, no matter how much time has passed since that trauma. And the tricky thing about this is sometimes these traumas happen to us so early in childhood that we don't even consciously remember them. But our bodies still remember them. Our bodies have retained this energetically contracted state, and our energetic matrix still carries these stored emotions. And we typically grow up living in such a way as to maintain these stored emotions in their frozen state so that they don't cause any problems in our lives. But what happens is that the moment we start to engage in life in such a way as to radically expand our energy, then all hell breaks loose because those stored painful emotions then begin to surface. This is also why it can be so hard for someone who's not an addict to understand why someone with addiction has the constant struggle to remain free of that addiction. They don't understand that there's a continual push-pull situation happening because the minute something positive is created in an addict's life, their energy expands and they can feel momentarily happy and joyous. But then what comes with that is the surfacing of more stored negative emotion that's been trapped in the body for a good chunk of time. This is why treatment for addiction has to be ongoing, because if you're an addict and you have a positive emotional experience, your energy expands, then stored negative emotions get released, and you'll feel the pain of those negative emotions. And so in order not to fall back into your addiction as a way to counter this pain, you're going to need outside support to help you stay positive, to help you stay strong, and not sink back down. So the strongest addictions are almost always tied to emotional pain created from trauma. And this, by the way, is why I wanted Jade to come on the show later to talk about EFT, because of EFT's unique ability to take away the negative charge around a particular experience rather quickly. Now, the trauma we're talking about may be abuse, whether that abuse be physical, sexual, or emotional. This trauma might be a profound loss of some sort, whether it's the death of a loved one or an unwanted divorce, or maybe even the loss of a business. Or this trauma might even be the intense pain that comes from a realization about oneself that one does not wish to be true. For example, in my practice, I've witnessed patients experience intense pain when they begin to realize that they are gay and they do not want to be. And the only reason I mention this is because I've seen it far too often be the source of addiction. While some patients accept this aspect of themselves readily, for others being gay is a deep and painful struggle that does in fact create a trauma for them. Depending on the environment you're raised in and what expectations the people around you have, whether you'll still be loved and accepted by your family if you come out, you may or may not feel comfortable to be true to your sexual orientation. Okay, so now we have prolonged emotional contraction that creates within us a feeling of emptiness and or a lack of wholeness. How then does an addiction serve to fill us? Well, addictions either stimulate us to feel an expansive emotion like excitement or euphoria, whether that comes from cocaine or shopping or exercise, or alternatively, an addiction can relax us enough to release any feeling of anxiety or fear, which also creates an energetic expansion of sorts. So we feel at peace, for example, from smoking pot. In both cases, energetically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to attain a state of what we call bliss. In everyday language, bliss is used to describe the feeling of exhilaration or exuberance or extreme peace, but in spiritual language, bliss is also the term used to describe the state a person has reached when they've attained enlightenment. I first began to see this clearly, this connection between spiritual longing and addiction, when I treated one particular patient many years ago. This patient, Scott, was a new patient who had come to me for headaches. And Scott was in his late 20s. He was an Orthodox Jew. He was married and had several children, and he worked in finance. And when I felt Scott's pulse on his very first visit, I felt the most unusual thing. What I felt was that he had a strong, intense aura that was unbelievably similar to some very high Tibetan lamas I had had the opportunity to know. And these Tibetan lamas were extremely spiritually evolved, meaning they had a sophisticated understanding and perception into the nature of spiritual law and how it operated. And these lamas actually spent the majority of their time in prayer. So as I'm taking Scott's pulse, feeling the similarity in his energy to the Tibetan lamas I had known, I was confused. I kept asking him questions about his life and his work, even his religion, and Scott was a perfectly wonderful human being, but none of his answers were in line at all with someone who was spiritually evolved. He admitted that he mainly was interested in religion for his children's sake, but that he didn't necessarily feel any strong personal connection to God, nor did he pray, and his wife was usually the one that took the children to temple. So I kept feeling his pulse and asking him questions because I was so perplexed by the energy, and I was wondering if I just wasn't feeling it correctly. But then it occurred to me to ask Scott if he took any medication by chance, to which he responded, "No, I don't take any medication, but I do smoke pot 6 times a day." And in that moment, I got it. I realized, oh yes, of course, that's why they call it getting high. Because spiritual people who spend most of their life in prayer have a very high energetic frequency that allows them to attain moments of bliss without the use of drugs. But that takes a lot of training and work to get there, and when you smoke pot as much as Scott did, you can get yourself to an energetic state similar to bliss, but without having done the spiritual work. You can experience temporary bliss. Of course, the downside to that approach is that when you come down off of that high, you can really crash because what you've actually given yourself is a false spiritual experience. There's no longevity to it. The only difference is that the bliss that comes from smoking pot or any other addiction has an edge to it, and the bliss that comes from true spiritual enlightenment does not. It has a very soft, wonderful feel. But all of this explains why meditation and spirituality are enormously helpful when one's trying to overcome addiction, because it addresses this deep desire to reach a state of bliss. I believe that that's why one of the most successful programs in treating addiction are those based on the 12-step program of AA, or Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's a structured program that gives you stepping stones. It's a step-by-step methodology that teaches you how to connect to divinity, not only within yourself, but also within others. So whether you go to AA or OA, Overeaters Anonymous, or any other program based on the 12 steps, what they're teaching you is how to accept all parts of yourself, to recognize the light and accept the darkness, what they call in psychology our shadow side. And the shadow side includes our pain and our suffering, includes any shame or judgment we might carry about ourselves or our pain, and as well it includes our attachment to that pain and suffering. So the 12-step programs are brilliant in that they help you open up and expand your energy, and when the negative stored emotions surface, they help you to be able to sit with and tolerate that pain. Overcoming addiction is not just about stopping a habit, so people who want to avoid these programs for whatever reason can use their willpower to stop the habit, but stopping the habit alone doesn't teach you how to love and accept yourself, and that's why sometimes these people will replace one addiction with another. They might stop drinking, but maybe they start overeating. So on its deepest level, addiction is about spiritual longing. And trauma can create the more serious addiction, so those traumas need to be addressed in order for a patient to overcome and stay free from addiction. And as to why people have addictions to one thing over another, typically the addiction has to address the area of the energetic contraction. Just to give you some rough cursory examples, if someone has a trauma at the level of the heart, for example, they lost someone they love, they will gravitate towards smoking because the smoke creates warmth and fills in energy that's missing at the heart level without also awakening the pain that's stored there. If someone has a trauma at the level of the third chakra, the solar plexus, typically they've experienced something that made them feel that they haven't achieved enough or that they weren't capable or good enough in some kind of way. Many times this can be a cruel parent who yelled a lot, but it can also mean a perfectly kind parent who didn't yell but had high expectations. And then these people will tend to have addictions related to the third chakra, that is the spleen, stomach, liver, and pancreas. So they'll more likely drink or overeat or be addicted to sugar. If someone has had a trauma that made them not feel safe in the world or felt like they weren't wanted, maybe they were physically or sexually abused, these are root chakra traumas, and these people are more likely to be addicted to drugs and painkillers because, again, they'll want something that will make them feel good without waking up the negative emotions stored in that contracted space. So the addiction that we pick will tend to shut down the specific area where our intense negative emotions are stored at the same time that it gives us a good feeling and fills in our energy temporarily. Again, these are just quick examples to let you start opening your mind to those associations. But what if we're talking about milder addictions like addiction to TV or addiction to surfing on the net, or maybe we don't get drunk and black out, but maybe we have one drink too many? To some people, these aren't addictions as much as they're bad habits, but they're certainly on the range of addiction because, again, whether the person is aware of it or not, the addiction has to do with spiritual longing that's filling in a hole. And most often the case is that the hole that needs to be filled comes from some type of fear or anxiety that the person has around forming a deeper connection either to themselves or to someone else. It's an avoidance of intimacy. These types of addictions have less harmful effects on one's life than stronger addictions do, but they do limit the richness and depth that one can experience in life. This avoidance of intimacy and lack of connection can also even extend to our life's work. To quote Kierkegaard, my all-time favorite philosopher, he said that there is nothing with which every man is so afraid as getting to know how enormously much he is capable of doing and becoming. And it's amazing how sometimes we can be so afraid of our life's work that we turn instead to watch TV or buy things off the home shopping network. So I'm going to have to wrap up my part of the show. And listen, I know that addiction is such a broad topic and we've just scratched the surface of it, but at least it's a start for people to see it through a slightly different lens. We're going to go to break now, and when we come back, I'm going to be talking with Jade Barbee, EFT Practitioner. You can check out his website, emotionalengine.com, and Jade will be sharing with us about EFT, the emotional freedom technique, and how it can help us release painful negative emotions that we carry in our bodies. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Suzanne Hill. I'm here today with Jade Barbee, EFT Practitioner. Jade, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Suzanne. Appreciate it.
So, Jade, before we specifically get to questions around addiction, I wanted to start by asking if you can explain to listeners clearly what EFT, the emotional freedom technique, is and how it works.
Sure. Well, for many of your listeners, they're familiar with acupuncture. And what EFT is essentially it's acupuncture without needles. And so it relies on the body's meridian system. And what you do, instead of puncturing the skin with needles, you tap on those points. And you tap on those points while tuning in to the energy of the problem at hand. So say if I was angry with someone, I would think about that person, I would name that anger, and then I would tap on, between 9 and 12 of these, what we call EFT points, while I'm thinking about what I'm angry about and talking about it a little bit. And what that does is it brings down the charge of that feeling so that you're just less angry. It's almost like you've been with and stayed with the energy of something while tapping, and it helps that energy naturally evolve away.
Now, what kind of things have you used this for?
Wow. Well, as I'm sure it's as varied as your practice, Suzanne. Mm-hmm. I typically help people resolve past trauma, and I also work with people around procrastination mm-hmm. and low self-esteem issues, because a lot of times those are all related. And a lot of times, of course, addictions come into play with this, because the behavior that we're doing in the present oftentimes has a lot to do with what we've taken on from the past. And there's an energy to that. And if you name that energy with your words, you tap on the acupoints, you can make surprising changes in your own experience in the present, meaning your need to go out and compulsively eat or watch TV or avoid doing what you need to do. And it can work with more serious matters as well.
So let's take overeating, for example. Let's say I'm addicted to overeating, and I've had a problem with food since I was a child, and now I'm in my 30s, and I'm 10 or 15 pounds overweight. I'm not happy. I still struggle with food every day. How can you help me? How often would I have to come, and how soon would I start seeing results?
Okay. Well, emotional eating, as I call it, is something that I'm very familiar with, and it's something I help people with a lot. And typically what that involves is a gentle exploration of when it started. Like you mentioned that it may have started when you were a child. Usually there are some past traumas associated with this, and or it doesn't have to be one specific kind of car crash trauma. It can be sort of a lot of small things that
add up.
They add up because they've caused you to believe certain things about yourself that are rather negative. And what's nice about EFT is that we can go in and really resolve these past memories so that they no longer carry a charge in the present. And what that does is, we might be able to go in and resolve a couple of memories in a session. We might have to sneak up on those memories because some of them can be quite scary and very, very serious. So everybody's very different. But what that does when we do that is it changes the need to fill that emptiness in the present. And people who are not even working necessarily on emotional eating will address some of these past traumas and suddenly have no need to do that behavior anymore in the present.
So then how often would I have to do this? How often would I work with you or any practitioner, and then do I have to do work on my own at home?
Sure. Well, I always say to make a 3-session commitment, because you just want to give it some time. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. There's a lot about EFT on the internet, and if people start to explore it, they'll see, it seems like, this can happen really fast and change can happen really quickly. But it's good to give yourself time to get to know your practitioner, to develop that rapport, and trust, because some of these past traumas are things that, you wouldn't tell. You might not even feel comfortable telling a therapist. So you want to take your time and gently explore what comes to the surface as you tap. And you might just feel like when you come into the office, I just feel bad about myself. I'm overweight. I just want this to change. And you would start there with the tapping. And as you tap, it brings up, the body starts to talk, and it brings up those areas you can explore. So
Could you give us an example? I mean, sometimes, I don't know if that's hard to do, but sometimes when people hear a clinical example, it's helpful.
Sure. I had a woman come to me who had agreed to do. I think she was ready to do 6 sessions. She knew it would take some time, and so we just kind of pulled that number out of the air, to give her enough time to explore her issue, which was coming home every day, eating ice cream, watching TV, not exercising. And she wanted to change her life. I mean, it was that simple. She didn't know what she wanted it to look like. She just knew she wanted it to change. And so what we did over those 6 weeks of working together was address some of the past traumas. And one of those past traumas was her being constantly berated by her parents for being overweight. And there were many of those. And what she did one time was went with her grandmother, and her grandmother would take her out to eat to soothe the situation. And so she developed this relationship with food as clearly a way of soothing herself. And so we took apart those past traumas and just tapped on them, and so that when she remembered them, they no longer held the charge. And this took some time because there was anger at her parents. There were a lot of different parts to this. But I worked with her for 6 weeks, and I got an email from her, maybe a year later, and she was running marathons.
Wow,
and
that's cool.
And I get periodic requests to sponsor her running, so I know that she's still doing it.
So did she come once a week, did you say, or how long were those sessions stretched out? How do you determine that?
An hour and a half once a week.
You did an hour and a half once a week.
6.
And did she do tapping at home? Did you give her homework to do at home?
I did, but a lot of times people don't do it. And I actually can't remember whether she did it. I don't think so. This was in session work that we did. And I would say that most people don't tap for themselves, but if they did, they would discover that this is something they can largely do on their own. They can resolve cravings for specific foods or specific substances like cigarettes in the moment using this method. And then they can work with a practitioner to resolve some of the past traumas. And together, that can really take care of it.
Now, one thing I think that listeners probably want to know is how long do these results last? Is it something that lasts, or is it just a temporary placebo effect?
Right. Well, there's a lot to the placebo effect. Right? It's pretty mysterious and amazing. But when past traumas are specifically resolved with EFT, and I'll give you an example. I had a guy come to me who had been held up at gunpoint and knew that this was making his life miserable. It wasn't an addiction situation, but literally he couldn't leave the house. And so we spent 2 days here on a retreat. He came and stayed here, and we spent 2 days tapping through basically a movie, scene by scene, of the event that happened, sort of sneaking up on it in a way that was comfortable for him, resolving the entire experience so that he no longer, when he thought about the experience, he just no longer felt that sort of, that feeling. And what it did for him was it enabled him to return to work. It enabled him to move out of his mom's house and to resume his life and basically just not think about it anymore. Naturally not think about it. Not push it away, but just naturally not think about it. So for him, this was a permanent result. And that happens when you fully resolve past troubling memories, including some of the worst. It's permanent. It's permanent.
Now, with this gentleman who had the anxiety about being held up, had he tried other things before to resolve that?
Oh, sure. He'd had talk therapy. And for him, that wasn't the right solution because he was being encouraged to talk about what happened, and that was re-traumatizing him.
So it just attached him further to that negative experience.
Right. I would say that that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Now, can EFT work if patients are on medication? Does that interfere, or is that workable?
Well, I can only speak from my experience. I've worked with a lot of people who are on medication. It's always beneficial if I know what they're on, just to make sure that it's, something that I can handle, and that the medication isn't necessarily going to impede their ability to do the tapping and to do the work. When people want to do EFT to help themselves, I don't think there's very much that can get in the way of that. So it doesn't, in my experience, medication doesn't adversely affect it, but it's nice to bring awareness to what's going on. Like, I need to know what's going on, and your practitioner will need to know if you're on any medication or if you're smoking pot 6 times a day. That's very important.
Now, are there any negative effects, side effects, or abreactions that a person can have from doing EFT?
There are no negative side effects that I know of. Sometimes people can bring up the trauma they can be flooded with it. So it's always good to have a skillful, experienced practitioner who can help you sneak up on it, because you don't want to go tell the story of a trauma when you're not ready or when it's going to bring up intensity. You want to gently sneak up, and that's what EFT is great at, is allowing you to gently sneak up. The other thing is that it can be like an acupuncture session where afterwards the person needs to rest and really assimilate the work and
integrate the energetic shifts. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So no, I'm not in my experience. No abreaction.
So typically, when people have a session, they're not. It's not going to have the experience of becoming more agitated after a session.
No, because you can test right in the session the person's level of agitation and work with EFT to bring that down. So if we tap into some memory that's had been hidden or suppressed, that's why a skillful, experienced practitioner is good, is that you kind of just stop and go, whoa, what's that feeling that's coming up? I can tell you're getting upset. Let's stop and let's just work on that feeling of being upset. And again, you resolve that before you move forward. So there's never a flooding situation.
So you talked about measuring the intensity of emotion. How do you go about doing that when you're working with patients?
Sure. Well, as a coach, I would ask you what you want to work on when you come in. And in the example of the emotional eating situation, the person might just feel really, really bad about themselves and have a really intense negative feeling about themselves. And so I would say, well, can you measure that on a scale of 0 to 10? How intense is that? And they'd be like, well, it's an 8. And I'd be like, well, it seems maybe higher if you were really to tune into it. And okay, they were like, well, it's a 10. I really couldn't feel worse about myself in this regard, but I really want to get better. So we start there. And of course, EFT works best when you can get specific. So I would help that person circle into maybe what happened when they first started doing this to themselves, or we would tap on some of those bad feelings in the present and just allow the story to unfold. And again, getting as specific as possible, as soon as possible, is the best way. And that helps the person recognize their progress too.
So it sounds like maybe something that you're also doing while you're working with them is really helping people expand their emotional literacy, perhaps, to help them really understand if they're feeling bad. Well, what does bad mean?
Right.
Does bad mean frustrated? Does it mean resentful?
Right.
And I suppose all of us can learn to develop greater and greater nuance to how we experience our feelings. What do you do if have you had a situation where someone wasn't able to move beyond that bad, or are most people receptive to expanding their emotional literacy?
Well, people want a magic pill. A lot of times they just want you to fix me. And that's not how emotional literacy really works. And of course, EFT can work rather quickly, but it's always better when a practitioner, and this is what I do, says, hey, I'm going to give you everything I got here, and we're going to see what happens. And it may take some time to to change your relationship to how you feel about yourself. Because when it comes to addictions, a lot of it is about self-esteem, and it's a lot about self-esteem based on what happened in the past. Mm-hmm. And so not only do we work on the self-esteem issues in the present and the negative beliefs in the present, we work on the events in the past. It can just take some time. But as people feel the changes, they start to believe it because it feels real. And because it feels real, it is real.
And that's the last question I want to ask you before we go to break. Does someone have to believe in this for it to work?
Oh, no. No. In fact, as long as you're not actively fighting against it, chances are it'll work quite well for you. But, you can't be coming in and trying to prove me wrong. That doesn't work. I mean, you might as well just save your money.
But you've had people come in and say, listen, I'm here because my wife, boyfriend, whatever sent me, and I'm here to make them happy. So, and then they actually have a transformative experience.
Sometimes, because generally there's a part of them that does want to get better. And that,
if that part's big enough,
if that part's big enough, we can do it. But you can't be doing it for someone else. You have to reach that moment of decision for yourself. And, with addictions, people have to come to that realization on their own. They have to be ready to change.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we're going to go to break now. We're here with Jade Barbee, EFT Practitioner. Thanks for listening. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be asking some more questions. Thanks, Jade. Hi, everybody. This is Suzanne Hill, and I'm here with Jade Barbee, EFT Practitioner. And Jade, I wanted to continue on the line of questioning. We had talked about using EFT for addiction, sort of releasing addictive behavior and clearing negative trauma. How can you use it to help with avoidant type of behavior, some of the lesser addictions?
Right, like watching TV or surfing the net when you should be doing other things, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you can develop some emotional intelligence for yourself. And, I see things a little bit differently from the way you were talking about addictions at the beginning. Actually, I think we see it exactly the same way. We just talk about it a little differently. Mm-hmm. And my understanding of, we want to do stuff that feels good. We want to feel better. Mm-hmm. And so watching TV or surfing the net a lot of times is self-soothing, right? And it feels good to do that. And it also feels good to avoid stuff that we don't want to do. And sometimes the stuff we don't want to do is the stuff that we've said we do want to do, like, I don't know, finish writing my book, for example, or build my business, or make those phone calls, or pay bills, or do things that, we otherwise are procrastinating, not doing. And so watching TV or surfing the net endlessly, trying to find the end of the internet, as they say, is really an answer for something. So what is it an answer for? And if you're working on applying EFT on your own, it's always good to have a target. It's always good to have a really specific thing. And you mentioned it earlier, the fears and frustrations are what we're trying to avoid. Mm-hmm. And, asking yourself some good questions, like, what am I getting to avoid by watching TV? Like, oh, well, I'm avoiding, finishing my project. And more specifically, what are you afraid of about finishing your project? And these are subconscious fears that sort of ride just below the surface of our awareness. And if you can really look at that, what am I afraid of? I worked with a singer recently, and she had never done EFT before. And we were just talking about what her dream, which was to get back on stage again. And she could visualize herself being up there, but she realized there was this fear coming up about it. And so I just kept asking her to get specific about what she was afraid of. And one thing that she realized she was afraid of was that she would lose her disability benefits.
Oh.
If she started singing again. So it wasn't that she was afraid of singing in front of other people, or because she was very confident in that area. She was afraid of the lack of safety in her financial situation, she wouldn't be able to support herself. She was afraid of feeling powerless. She was afraid of having to, and then having to make it as a singer. All this pressure would be put on that. So she just did nothing. She just took no action on her own behalf. And so when we applied EFT to that fear that she would be powerless, all this stuff opened up for her. She really started to think about singing differently. I understood she started to sing more. I don't know what's happened with her in the last few weeks. This was only about a month ago. But we had also addressed some of her fears of being powerless and times when she was powerless in the past. So it's really kind of amazing when you address specific fears with EFT, because you can actually do something about them. That's what's so great about this technique. You start to open up in the present. You start to open up.
Well, what I was going to ask you, though, is it different than therapy in the sense, like, let's say a therapist asked her the same line of questioning. Is there something about the tapping that starts to let the mind free associate in a different way so that they can get to certain emotions? Is it making that different than a therapeutic session?
Well, I think that that tapping brings in the body, just like an acupuncture session, and there's something about intentionally holding the energy of this fear that I've been so afraid to even admit to, right? I'm afraid I won't be safe if I sing, okay? So holding that fear and tapping, bringing in the body, something starts to happen, and it starts to bring up, you start to circle into some of the more important areas of the past that are starting to come up, times when things were unsafe in the past. And it starts to bring down the charge on that fear so that when she would think about singing now, she's no longer afraid in the same way. She has other concerns, but she's just not afraid. So it brings in the body. To answer your question about talk therapy, this brings in the body. I mean, people who come to see me but who are also in talk therapy, they're tapping now in their talk therapy sessions for themselves to help resolve the energy and allow the energy of the stories that they're telling to evolve away. I think there's an emotional piece to therapy that's missing in a lot of talk therapy. I train therapists how to integrate EFT into their practice now. That's one of my other areas. And there's an allowing of a person's emotional experience while tapping that's really, really important. That's missing from a traditional therapeutic approach. And there's a body-centered awareness that's missing, and therapists are realizing that.
So that once the person starts to, in this case, if you start to eliminate your fear around something, then once that fear is eliminated, you have more energy in moving forward towards the thing that you want.
Right, because you're no longer spending all this time protecting yourself from something that happened in the past now. I mean, what they're realizing with trauma is that when we have a traumatic event, it's all encapsulated in the past, or a traumatic, or it could be a collection of traumatic memories. And when we see stuff in the present time that mirrors that stuff from the past, we literally dissociate from the present, and it's almost like we're right back there. And when you can apply EFT to that energy and systematically to that memory, or just to the fear in general, it's almost like, wow, I'm dealing with this for the first time. I'm admitting this fear for the first time. I'm feeling it resolved for the first time. And now I am free to go forward. Now, that may be scary too, right? You can tap on that too. But now I'm free to go forward without dragging this trauma behind me, or without trying to protect myself from
feeling
what might
trauma.
happen, right? Or what might happen. Because, when you have past trauma like that, and many of us do, you're obsessed with sort of keeping yourself safe in the present, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And
so it's great for kids then, right? If we had our kids tap on a regular basis, that could discharge the traumas as they occur, theoretically.
Absolutely. I have kids keep a little tapping machine in their pocket, and when they're feeling bad, they can pull it out and tap on their fingertips.
What's a tapping machine?
Tapping machine, yeah.
A tapping machine, that's something literal, or are you just imaginary?
It's just imaginary, but
oh, okay.
But it's a way of them getting themselves feeling better and realizing, wow, I have control over my emotions. This is amazing. Yeah.
What kind of issues have you helped children through?
Mostly troubling events that happened at school that they can't get their attention off of, is where I focused my work with kids. A lot of times when I work with a kid who has trouble, I work with the parent first, just to work through the parents' issues around the kid and the parents' feelings of needing the kid to be fixed, or, that sort. There's the primary caregiver is so close, and the energy there is so present that it's always better to work with mom or dad first.
Yeah, you have to treat both. Now, do you work on Skype, or is it better to be in person?
I work on the phone and I work on Skype. In person's a little tough because I am up in southern Vermont, but luckily this technique is so portable that people can tap on themselves and be miles and miles from me and not have to travel, and really can get a benefit, especially when we circle into, I call it the energy of what's really going on here. And sometimes it takes some time to get there, but we can get there, especially if your goal and your intention is to get there.
So, Jade, I know that people can reach you at emotionalengine.com. Is that the best place to reach you? That's the best place to reach me online, is emotionalengine.com. And we have 2 minutes to go to break, but I wanted you to talk about your writer's block of EFT that you've been working on. Can you share that with us quickly?
Oh, sure. I've started an online school called Emotional Engine Academy, and it's basically a trick to get people tapping every day. And I do guided audios that help people tap every day. And in this particular course, it's called EFT for Writer's Block. It's to help people to tap on all those fears and frustrations that come up around writing, to the self-sabotage that we do. If you need to write for your business and you're not doing it, there's an energy there. And there are certain ways that I know work very well for addressing those fears of failure, fears of success, fears of I'm not worthy of succeeding, the fear of change, that our body is just naturally likes that comfort zone. And so when you tap on that stuff, and you do it daily, your writing just starts to flow. And I'm seeing that with writer friends of mine, people who are testing out the course. I've seen it in my own life, and I'm really excited about it. It's a 24-lesson course, and you can find it on my website.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there any last thing you want to share? We've got about 15 seconds.
Sure. I encourage people to check out EFT for themselves. I have a video on YouTube, and just type in my name, Jade Barbee, EFT, and you can tap along with the cravings video that I have there if you have a craving for a food or a cigarettes or something, and or tap along with the constricted breathing exercise, and explore EFT for yourself. There's a lot out there.
Great. Thank you so much, Jade, for coming on the show. Everybody, that was Jade Barbee. Again, his website, www.emotionalengine.com. This is Suzanne Hill, host of the Healing Power Hour, tuning out, saying please make use of what you have learned today, as knowledge is power, and much love to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please join Suzanne Hill for another edition of the Healing Power Hour next Wednesday at 11 a.m. in the West, 2 p.m. in the East on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Have a healthy week.